and welcome to the Total Soccer Show. My name is Daryl Grove, and I'm joined today by Yahoo Soccer's Henry Bushnell. Henry, hello from Chicago.
Hello, Daryl. It's great to be on with you.
And I guess I've got that the wrong way around. I'm in Richmond, you're in Chicago.
Exactly, yeah. Chicago, which I suppose Taylor was a bit more down on Chicago than you were in the last episode, but you guys have some not so flattering things to say about Chicago.
I'm a big fan of Chicago. I'm not sure what Taylor's problem was.
No, I understand. And now I look out the window and it's cold and rainy and dark, so I understand. And especially when we're talking about soccer, I understand it.
His complaints were mostly weather-based. It was not about the people. So you're based in Chicago, but the thing that happened in Chicago last week and you attended was the US Soccer Board meeting, and you wrote two stories about the board meeting for Yahoo Soccer. I've got all kinds of questions I want to ask you about this, but first I want to kind of set the scene for our listeners. How much access did you have? Like, was this like you had a glass to your ear to the door listening in? Was there an open session for journalists? Like, how did US Soccer present this to the media?
I was sitting right behind Ernie Stewart and Jay Berhalter.
Wow.
So it's basically it's a big 2-day thing. The first day is an open session that's open to media, and to this one they actually, because it was in Chicago, they invited all their staff to come, and there were probably 30, I guess, staff members and various other people. Like there were a couple representatives from the American Outlaws there. And this is like so that Friday is the less interesting part of it. Saturday is when all the good stuff happens, and that's behind closed doors, and most of it does not get out to the public.
Okay.
But so Friday is basically, to kind of set the scene, you just like understand the dynamics of an organization like this. It's essentially like, so the board sets the vision, the staff executes the vision. So sitting around these tables are board and like high-level staff members, and basically a significant chunk of the open session is various, C-level staffers telling the board how their departments are executing that vision and how they're doing. And like in some cases, it's pretty like cut and dry. Here's the reality. Here's how we're doing. Like for example, with the CFO, basically like lays out how they're going along with this 5-year spending plan, and how like, which we can talk about later, like how $9 million of a year on legal fees as opposed to $3 million, how that's impacting the spending plan they laid out. And then some of the other presentations,
not positively is my guess.
No. And then some of the other presentations kind of feel like more almost like self-promotional, like putting a positive spin on things for everybody. An example of that is like Ernie Stewart gave a presentation on just like how the men's national team is doing, basically, and it was all rosy and everything's going well and stuff like that. So
was it edited highlights of the 2019 performance? I can see there are some positives, right? But you've got to kind of spin it to make it all positive.
Right, exactly, yeah. So he's talking about. Obviously, he admitted that they had 2 goals to win the Gold Cup and to qualify for the semifinals of the Nations League, and he admitted that they failed with the first one, and didn't quite admit that they succeeded with the second one, I guess, but not exactly how a lot of people would have liked them to.
They wanted it to be smoother, right? So let's start there then. What else did Ernie Stewart say was a positive for the men's national team in 2019?
So I actually thought one of the most interesting parts of this whole it was a 3+ hours, not even counting the media stuff afterwards.
Of Ernie Stewart?
No, of the whole board meeting.
Ooh,
the whole Friday session of the board meeting. No. So one of the most interesting parts of the whole thing was actually during Ernie Stewart's presentation. He laid out this. He had this table. He had the slide that said, and actually I have the slides. He said something like, basically like this year we're playing with the youngest and most inexperienced group of players that the U.S. men's national team has ever had at the start of a World Cup qualifying cycle.
Okay. I saw this in your article, right? Didn't have the lowest average age, according to Ernie Stewart.
Right, so it's like, according to Ernie Stewart, the average age is 25.8 years, and that's lower than in 2010, it was at 26.6. And that's at the starting 11. Overall, he's at 25.9.
Okay.
And like as he's giving this, though, Sunil Gulati kind of like cuts him off and says, hold up, like what exactly are these numbers? Like when are these ages calculated? And Ernie kind of like struggled to explain it a bit, and then he got around to saying that it was at the beginning of the cycle. But Sunil's like what does that mean? Because technically, like, this World Cup qualifying cycle hasn't really started yet.
Yeah, September 2020 is when it starts, right?
Right. So apparently Ernie had calculated it, this year's numbers, based on the start of the Nations League, which was a couple months ago. And he had calculated the previous World Cup cycles, or somebody else had calculated the previous World Cup cycles based on the start of the penultimate round of World Cup qualifying. And those obviously, in the cycle, the Nations League started more than 3 years away from the World Cup.
Right.
So there's a bit,
so he's cheated by a year.
Right, he's basically cheated by a year. So, if you add a year to his numbers, then this is not even the youngest and most inexperienced group of players ever. So,
okay, I have two questions then. One, do you think Ernie Stewart was deliberately trying to mislead, or is this just a calculation error?
I have no idea. It might be I guess I'd give him the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, because it does have the air of, to quote Stephen Colbert, like truthiness to it, right? Like, Pulisic's young, McKennie's young, Josh Sargent is young, Sergiño Dest is young. There are a lot of young players on this US national team.
And it's like, it is the narrative that they want to portray, and it's like what everybody's been saying they should be doing, especially after what happened in 2017. So, I don't know. And I mean, even with that adjustment, like, it still is one of the younger groups. So, yeah, I get what he's saying. But I get, I don't know, like, the whole overall, like, the overall sense I got from his presentation was he was trying to put a positive spin on things, and that certainly helped him with that, I'd say.
So my second question, why was Sunil Gulati there? He's not the president anymore.
Yeah, so the past president gets a spot on the board. So when Sunil was president, Dr. Bob was still on the board.
Right.
Now Dr. Bob is not on the board anymore, but Sunil is still there, and yeah, he was. He certainly, like, he often seems like the smartest guy in the room, and is the smartest guy in the room, and seemed like that again.
He certainly has more of a background in numbers than Ernie Stewart does, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
It's interesting also to see Sunil Gulati being the one challenging the narrative of US soccer, because he used to be the one out there presenting the narrative.
Right. Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why I found it that moment so interesting. Yep.
All right, sticking with Ernie Stewart, I did see in your reporting that so Ernie Stewart has been promoted essentially to sporting director, right, overseeing the men's and women's programs. And It seems like he talked a little bit about replacing himself, the US men's national team general manager. The quote in your story is that the next GM will have other responsibilities than I had when I started. Was there any indication, or can we even speculate on what the next GM, what the role will be and how it will be different to what Ernie Stewart was doing?
Yeah, so I think, there was a lot of, maybe controversy is a bit too strong, but there were a lot of people criticizing U.S. soccer for what they laid out as the role of the GM when Ernie Stewart before Ernie Stewart got the job, and that it was too narrow, right? And that it was only focused on the senior national team, and it didn't have any say over youth teams or anything like that. It sounds like Ernie agreed with that, and that it was too narrow, and that he wants this person to have, like, he wants their domain to be a bit broader. And it sounds like that's what's going to happen. Now, obviously, Ernie has more say over everything now as a sporting director, but I think he wants the GMs to have – so Ernie as a sporting director wants to present a vision for the whole national team setup, and he wants the youth teams to be aligned with the senior teams and things along those lines. And I think he wants the GM on the men's side as well as the women's side, I would assume, to be able to have to be able to get youth teams in line as well. So I believe he specifically mentioned youth teams as something that this next GM is going to have say over. Now, of course, the GM will have less say in a lot of things because he'll have Ernie above him.
Yeah.
So I guess the idea is probably that it's not going to be. We have no idea who exactly they're looking at for this type of role. And Ernie said he will eventually get more info on this once the search process is closer to being over or is actually over. But my sense is the main thing is that it won't be confined to the senior team. It'll have say over the youth teams as well. So
meaning that they'll have a big role in selecting the next U20 coach and the other age groups, and maybe that Kate Margraff's role as women's GM will be similar.
Yeah, that's what I would think so. Yeah, like I would assume, and Ernie will again. I we'll see what the dynamic is between Ernie and that GM, and what the balance of power is like there. But yes, I would imagine that both of them would have say over that.
And did he mention any sort of timeline for when they might be appointing a men's GM?
No, but it sounds like on Saturday during the executive session, he was kind of going to. I think the first step is kind of presenting this new vision for what the role is going to be to the board, getting that approved, then they can kind of and I'm sure he already has candidates, but I don't think an appointment is imminent. Like I think we're still a bit of a ways off from actually hearing a name.
Hey, it's Daryl here, cutting in with a quick ad read for ExpressVPN. You've heard us talk about how ExpressVPN can mask your IP address and unlock content from all over the world. Hello, BBC iPlayer, Dutch Netflix, and a Taiwanese subscription to 11 Sports. But have we told you about the security ExpressVPN offers? I think we have, but I'm going to do it again. It's a virtual private network, which means once you connect to the internet via ExpressVPN, all your network data is encrypted, secure and safe from hackers and looky-loos. It also means no one can track what you're doing online. So, say you work at a large sporting organization based in Chicago and you want to search for another job, connecting to ExpressVPN first means there'd be no record of your escape attempt. ExpressVPN is also genuinely the fastest VPN I've ever used, and I've used a few. It's available for as little as $6.67 per month. To protect your online activity and find out how you can get 3 months free, go to expressvpn.com/soccer. That's expressvpn.com/soccer for 3 months free with a 1-year package. Visit expressvpn.com/soccer to learn more. Okay, and while we're on Ernie Stewart, there's lots of other stuff to talk about, but while we're focused on Ernie Stewart, it seems to me from a Caitlin Murray story for Yahoo Soccer that Ernie Stewart was the chief defender of what is termed the Chicago policy, which is becoming the infamous diktat that if you're going to be a US youth national team coach, you have to move to Chicago.
That is correct. And yeah, it was... it's because on the outside, all we hear is criticism of this policy. And somebody asked Ernie that there was about a 40-minute media session afterwards with Ernie, Carlos Cordero, and Kate Markgraf. And somebody actually asked Carlos about the policy, and Ernie asked if he could take the question and gave a pretty passionate defense of it. And basically made it, from his perspective, it's ridiculous that anybody would criticize the policy. And basically his argument is that, face-to-face interaction is important, and kind of unscripted interaction is important. People that, when you're seeing people consistently around the office, not just, in scheduled virtual digital meetings or, communicating via online messenger systems, that's really important for getting everybody on the same page. And it's not just coaching staffs. It's also coaches and sporting directors communicating with the communication staff and the person who runs coaching education and somebody who's involved in, youth team management or whatever. And to some extent, I understand that. But I also think it's, I don't know. There's a really interesting quote from Stewart. He said, what we're trying to do in the future when we talk about identity style play, it goes way further than that. I know no single club in the world that has success that has coaches scattered all over the place.
So the key word there is club, right? Exactly.
That's exactly what I was going to say. And it's there's been a lot of talk about him and Greg treating the national team like a club team. And that seems like what his vision is here. And you guys had Bobby Worshaw on the pod probably last month. And I think he had some, I think, really interesting takes on just this idea of trying to treat it like a club. Yeah. And that there's some merit to it. Just because other national teams don't do that doesn't mean it's inherently bad and wrong. But I also think thinking of this as a club, is a lot of problematic. And there was another instance where Carlos Cordero like referenced small European countries as an example. You know, they have everything under one roof. They have the national team staff, and they have coaching, education, and youth team stuff, and then they have fields right outside at these like training centers. But obviously, they're like comparing a small European country to the United States, which is basically the size of Europe as a whole. Is, you know, it's apples to oranges completely, and the idea that there would be one centralized location is very problematic in that sense in the U.S.
It's also true that Soccer House is not a big soccer campus, right? It's a big old mansion with no soccer fields attached to it.
Right, exactly. And that's the issue. So, like, I do think there's merit to having everybody under one roof and everything under one roof, but to institute that policy when you are also to say everybody has to move to Chicago, when you're simultaneously saying, okay, but our main Chicago office isn't adequate, we're going to look for other space in Chicago, and long term we're thinking about possibly moving somewhere else. You know, I think that's the main issue here. And I instituting that policy when it only could be in place for specific to Chicago for a few years. I think that's where a lot of the issue is.
Yeah, because all these people could now be told, oh, by the way, now you're all moving to Kansas.
Right. Exactly. Yep.
It also seems to me maybe that it would have been better to have a policy of encouraging people to move to Chicago, but not demanding it. And then you wouldn't have lost coaches like Vandenberg. Yeah.
And, you know, so they have been somewhat flexible with this, actually, to be fair to them. And
okay.
So Vlatko, for example, is not moving to Chicago, I believe.
I believe
he's living in.
That's interesting.
I believe he's living in Kansas City, and will spend like a couple days a week in Chicago when he's not off, you know, in a national team training camp or something.
Yeah.
And I'm not 100% sure about this, but I don't think Kate Markgraf moved to Chicago either. I think I'm not 100% sure about this. But I guess my point is, so like there's this argument of, well, if Pep Guardiola wanted to coach the national team but didn't want to move to Chicago, like this would rule out Pep Guardiola as a candidate. Like, I think if Pep Guardiola wanted to coach the national team and U.S. Soccer wanted him, but his one specification was he didn't want to move to Chicago, I think they'd make an allowance for that. And they might make an allowance and maybe they'd make an allowance for, I don't know what the level you would have to be at to get that allowance made. But it's not like a hard and fast rule, as long as you can spend some time there, I think, interacting with people. But yeah, I don't know. The whole discussion of that was very interesting.
So speaking of moving, I believe there was some talk from Carlos Cordero about moving out of Soccer House, like outgrowing Soccer House. Like, was he specific about where US Soccer might move its location to?
So I think, like basically the situation is like Soccer House, for those who don't know, is this, you know, back in the early 90s, the city of Chicago basically like lured the U.S. Soccer Federation to Chicago and gave them these two 19th century mansions to serve as their headquarters in exchange for getting the opening game of the 1994 World Cup for hosting that.
Yeah. I did not know that. I'm sort of hilarious.
Sure. Yeah. And that, of course, that was back when U.S. Soccer had a few dozen employees. And now they have 180, and the space is just completely inadequate in a lot of ways.
So the city of Chicago were like, we really want Diana Ross to take that penalty kick in.
Yeah, exactly. So in the short term, U.S. Soccer they're going to lease office space within Chicago. That's the short term solution, and so they'll have another office somewhere nearby that I imagine, you know, some portion of the staff will move to because they're continuing. Carlos Cordero, I think he said they're at around 180 employees right now. And he threw out the number 300 as a number they're going to get to in the somewhat near future.
Interesting.
So that's pretty remarkable growth.
Let's hope at least one of them is a Spanish language content producer.
Yes, I would appreciate that, and a lot of people would appreciate that. Yep. But so then beyond that, like they want to, they'll be moving out of Chicago the long-term vision is to get one national training center or multiple national training center that, as we mentioned, is this place that not only has all the people on the administrative side and the coaching staff, but also has a training field right outside the window, basically, or several training fields.
So would this be a place that like national teams would meet up and play there, and coaching education could happen, and everything could happen in one place?
Yeah, exactly. And I imagine like it would be like a lot of the youth national team training camps would be there and stuff and maybe not all of them. But so the question is where that's going to be, and I think they're a long way off from figuring out where exactly that's going to be and what it'll look like. They're very much still in the preliminary stages of those discussions. But I mean, you'd have to think that like Southern California, as an example, that would be a pretty good choice, I think. But the obvious issue is like there's no perfect location. Like even Southern California has its faults because it's, if that's where you're going to hold national team training camps and you're asking players from Europe to get all the way out there,
right,
for these international breaks, like because it's such a big country, every location has something good about it. Every location has something bad about it. So I think my guess would be what you end up seeing is multiple locations, multiple national training centers. And that's obviously something that's going to take a long time to put in place and to physically build and to get everybody on board with.
I weirdly, even though it doesn't sound that exciting, I would be excited by that though, because I think it would make a lot of sense, especially if we had like an East Coast and a Central and a West Coast center or location.
Exactly.
That teams could use and US Soccer could use. That would not just look very professional. I think it would be really useful.
Yep, exactly. And it would solve this. It would solve the problem that's being discussed a lot about having everybody under one roof, but also having them under one roof in a practical location.
Yeah.
And which Chicago, as has been discussed, is not if you want to play soccer year round.
Can we afford this? Like financially, can US Soccer afford to build all these centers?
It's a very good question. And I imagine that's the main question that they're considering when they think about this. Because, they've already developed various plans for how they're going to spend their money. Now, I think one big thing is that the 2026 World Cup should be a massive, cash boom for them.
Yes.
And so maybe it's something that they do after the 2026, or maybe it's something that where they know 2026 is coming and they can afford to start spending the money before that and putting these plans in place.
Yeah, they could do like a payday loan type thing.
Yeah.
Daryl here, breaking in with an ad read for Away, thoughtful luggage for modern travel. I'm in Boston right now, and the luggage I brought with me is the Away Bigger Carry-On. It's sized just a little bigger to make the most of the room you get for carry-on. It's got a lightweight and durable shell that's made to last a lifetime and has so far stood up well to the Boston weather. Next stop is northern Michigan, where I assume my suitcase will handle the weather better than I will. It's also got 4 360-degree spinner wheels, so I'm as mobile as Frankie de Jong when I'm moving along with my Away Bigger Carry-On. It's got the optional ejectable battery, so I can keep my phone powered and keep on tweeting. It's got the removable laundry bag, so I never forget what's been worn and what hasn't. We don't need to do the smell test with Away luggage. Away luggage also comes with a 100-day trial, so you can try it out, and a lifetime warranty, so they'll fix or replace any bag that needs it. For a $20 discount, visit awaytravel.com/TSS and use promo code TSS at checkout. That's $20 off if you go to awaytravel.com/TSS and use promo code TSS at checkout. So I imagine the 2026 World Cup, like cash windfall, will be sort of like the 2016 Copa America Centenario, but just with much bigger numbers. And I've seen in your reporting, there's a lot of talk about we basically doubled the reserves almost, right, to $162 million with the 2016 Centenario money. But I also saw in your reporting that the reserve is expected to keep dipping every year as US Soccer spends the money, and that 162 will go down to a $50 million reserve by financial year 2023. So there are some lawsuits that the US Soccer is fighting that I know that we'll be spending money on. And I want to talk about those, but I also want to talk about, do you know where the rest of that money is being spent?
So, no, I don't know specifically, but I also haven't spent a ton of time looking into this. So I would imagine it's – and a lot of it is still to be spent. Like I think we're about a year and a half into this 5-year plan, I think.
Yeah.
So not a lot, and also it's most of the spending comes in the later year. Like I believe they're like the plan deficit in the final year of this plan was like above $30 million.
Okay.
Whereas in the first year of the plan, like the reserves were only dropping from 150 million to like 139 million, or something like that. But it's going into stuff. It's what you'd expect. Like I imagine there are various youth development initiatives and coaching education and stuff like that.
Is this stuff that could be available as information if we went after it, or are they being somewhat secretive about it?
I imagine if we went after it, we would be able to. I'm sure they'd be happy to tell us where it's being spent. Yeah, I just haven't paid. I think the reason I and probably a lot of and you guys and a lot of other people haven't paid attention is because they're not spending it on any like big noticeable, like we're gonna go spend $50 million and build this set of fields or complex or whatever. Yeah.
There's no ribbon cutting necessarily. It's just a little money into this program, a little money into that program.
Right, or at least no ribbon cutting that we care about. Yeah.
Just some tiny ribbons somewhere.
Yeah.
And you mentioned in one story that they expect to spend, for example, $9 million fighting lawsuits in financial year 2020, which includes right now and then through to, I assume, like April next year, right?
Right, April 1.
So what are those lawsuits is my question. I know there's the US Women's National Team lawsuits. I can't remember what else is US Soccer fighting.
So it's that one. It's the separate Hope Solo one, which is over similar issues but is separate.
She just filed separately, basically.
Right. And there was some legal stuff about whether they were going to be joined or not, and they're not going to be joined. There is the US Soccer Foundation sued them. I don't know if you guys remember this, but it was basically
yes.
It was really dumb. At least from the outside, it seems dumb. It's over like the US Soccer Foundation is like the charitable organization basically, and this was over like, and obviously they have very similar names and they're similar, like they have the same USSF would be the acronym, and it was over, the lawsuit was over like branding marks or something like that. So that sounded dumb, but the big one that it sounds like based on what I hear is costing US Soccer a lot of money is the NASL lawsuit. Can I take
a guess at this before you give me the actual details?
Yeah.
Is this the NASL arguing that US Soccer favoured MLS back in the day and wouldn't let NASL become a Division I sanctioned league?
Correct. Or MLS and USL, I think. Yeah.
Okay.
That's basically it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Ooh, and that's still going on. That's so weird because NASL is no longer around, and yet they're just continuing with this lawsuit. Right.
And I mean, I have not dug into it. Like, you would have to ask somebody else about what exactly the status of it is. But yeah, it's still ongoing. And because it's gone on for so long, that's why it's the one that is costing them a lot of money.
Oh, and NASL, some of the teams had very wealthy owners, right? So those guys, if they're footing the bill, they can just keep going with the legal expenses and maybe not even notice that the money is missing.
Exactly. Yeah. It seems like they are very committed to fighting this battle. Yeah.
Oh dear. Oh dear. Oh dear. Okay. One other thing that I'm really interested in, of course, is the CEO search. So Dan Flynn either has stepped down or is stepping down.
Has stepped down.
Stepped down. So right now there is no CEO, Chief Executive Officer. I guess my first question: did you get any sense of what's taking so long?
So we got a sense of what Carlos Cordero says is taking so long.
Okay. Cynicism noted.
Whether we completely believe his narrative is kind of up to us.
Okay.
But basically, his version is that so Dan Flynn announced he was stepping down February, I think. Pretty around then, soon after that, they started a search, hired a search firm, and then in May, apparently, Carlos Cordero says that he wasn't really happy with where the search was going, and he wasn't happy with the job the search firm had done or the candidates that it had dug up. And so they decided they were kind of just going to reboot the search. And in September, they hired. Now, I guess because the summer was busy, it took a while. And Carlos Cordero was off in France, of course. And so it took until September to hire another search firm and basically restart the search. And now, that search firm has come up with various candidates. And on Thursday, apparently, last week, Thursday, they interviewed a bunch of candidates. Now, we don't have any names. We don't have any specific number of candidates or what stage this is at. But that's basically Carlos Cordero's narrative. Now, of course, coinciding with that narrative, it was all the issues over the summer with the Glassdoor reviews and this idea of there was kind of like a quiet rebellion inside U.S. soccer. There was that good New York Times article that detailed some of it. Carlos Cordero says that it did not impact the CEO search, but the cynicism and just what the logical assumption would be that Jay Berhalter was widely considered to be a favorite or a top candidate for the role for a while. He's the current COO, brother of Greg, obviously. Mm-hmm. And now we don't really know where he stands. And there's an idea that maybe the Glassdoor reviews did have an impact and that it was probably going to be Berhalter. And now they realize they kind of have to open it up and not let that happen, and that it should come from that maybe the CEO should come from the outside.
Does the timing of the Glassdoor reviews and the reopening of the search, does that all line up with the theory you just outlined?
Yes, I believe it does. Yeah.
But Carlos Cordero's not going to admit that that's how it went down, right?
No. And so it's interesting because Carlos Cordero does admit that the Glassdoor reviews and a lot of that was, I forget, he might have called it a wake-up call or something along those lines.
So I remember a quote, something about tremor lines or something.
Yes, I think that's right. Yeah.
I actually have your story in front of me. I'll see if I can find this.
Yeah. So he did say, it was a good wake-up call. It alerted us to potentially some tremor lines.
There we go.
And then so basically the main thing that they have revealed that's come out of that is they brought in this consulting firm that works with various organizations on organizational development, basically. And that firm came in and gave it like a 50, 60 question survey to all U.S. soccer employees. And they're basically figuring out what's wrong with themselves. And trying to move forward, which now, a lot of people will be cynical about this and say, "Oh, that's just for PR." So it looks like that they're trying to address their issues and they're not actually going to do anything. But my impression is that that this is legit, and they do know that they have to evolve. And Carlos Cordero admitted that they didn't handle their growth of the size of their staff as well as they could have, or as well as they should have, and that led to a lot of issues.
So that's possibly what led to some of the bad workplace, the bad culture in the workplace.
Yeah, I think exactly. Now, I mean, that also, there are good leaders would be able to fix that. Good executives would fix that, and you have to place some blame on the executives setting that culture too. But it is hard to manage rapid growth like that. And so I came away somewhat hopeful that they were going to address some of these issues.
Is it as simple as if Jay Berhalter is appointed as the next CEO, then that means that in the end they've ignored the Glassdoor reviews, and we should all be slightly concerned about the workplace culture at US Soccer and what happens going forward? And if it's not Jay Berhalter, then we can be kind of optimistic that Carlos Cordero saw the light and saw the need for a bit of a change in direction. Honestly,
I think that's yes. I think the answer to that is, and it's not that simple. They could, a lot of things can evolve within the organization, even if Jay Berhalter were appointed CEO, I think. But also, if you're US Soccer and you have any sense for what has gone wrong or where you need to go, and even just from a public image standpoint, and what message it would send to your own employees after all of the news surrounding Glassdoor, to then still appoint Jay Berhalter as the CEO. I just don't see how you can do that. And I do think we should be very critical of U.S. soccer if they decide to do that.
Because that would be just going and standing right over the tremor line, right?
Right.
And maybe even jumping up and down on it and seeing if you can make it open up.
Yep. And it would be telling the employees that, they're saying publicly that they hear them. It would be telling the employees in practice, no, we don't hear you. All of this stuff is for PR. We're just going to keep doing what we're doing.
Yeah. Oh, so do we have any sort of timeline on when we might get a final appointment?
I believe so. I want to say Carlos Cordero might have said early 2020. But I'm not sure about that. No, he wouldn't put. No, actually, sorry, I take it back. I don't think he put any sort of timeline on it. And He said, yeah, he left it completely. He was very vague about it, and his reasoning is, like, for the confidentiality of the process and to be fair to the candidates or whatever. But no timeline at all. That said, like, I'd expect, I think early 2020 is probably a good guess.
Yeah, so we'll say Q1 2020 would make sense, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise,
right.
It's a bit weird if it goes on that much longer.
Right. And I do think, like, at some point they really should give us more information on just we don't know, we really don't know anything, until they give some sort of specifics about how many candidates they have or anything like along those lines.
Yeah.
Everybody's going to remain cynical and very skeptical that this search process isn't really a search process, and that they're just going to do what they do and select a candidate, and that they haven't gone through as thorough of a search as they say they're going through. So I would really hope that we get some sort of info on that soon.
Was there any, if we're playing the guessing game, was there any information? Was there anyone from overseas? Were there internal candidates mentioned? Was there any information at all?
So he said, Carlos said there's one candidate from overseas.
Okay.
He specifically said that there were men and women interviewed, or not necessarily interviewed yet, but that are candidates. The one interesting part I thought was, I believe it was Jeff Carlisle from ESPN asked him, or somebody, I think Jeff asked him whether there were internal candidates, and Carlos said, very specifically, I said at the beginning there were internal candidates. And then Paul Tenorio asked him, are there still internal candidates?
Oh, clever Tenorio.
And Carlos wouldn't answer that. He said, I'm not going to comment beyond that. So
that could mean that Jay Berhalter has been removed, right?
I guess so, yeah. We have again, that doesn't really give us any information, but it's also just interesting to keep in mind as we move forward. And it means that there's an outside chance there are no internal candidates, which I think a lot of people would be on board with, and a lot of people think would be good. But again, it's vague, and there could be, for all we know, could be more than half internal candidates. I don't know.
Is there anything about this board meeting that I haven't asked you about that stood out to you? I'm trying to just cover all my bases here. No. I mean, I think I kind of set the scene at the beginning. It's basically. Yeah, nothing else that I tried to include most of the interesting stuff, if I haven't mentioned it already in the podcast, is either in what I wrote or in what Caitlin Murray wrote for us over the weekend. So if there is something, listeners can go find it there. Well, I'll tell you what, I'll put links to all 4 of those stories in the show notes so people can read all of that on Yahoo Soccer. Well, that would be lovely. I appreciate that. All right, Henry, I will say thank you for taking the time to talk to me today. I really enjoyed it. Thanks a lot, Daryl. Always a pleasure.